Alara Moretti stepped off the train at San Lorenzo del Mare with only 2 suitcases and a heart full of devotion. She had left everything behind in Milan: her prestigious nursing position, her circle of friends, the safety of the city lights, just to be near the man who once made her believe in warmth. Dr. Damien Volterra. The name alone once made her chest flutter. Now it tightened something deeper inside her. The seaside town looked almost unreal in the late afternoon glow. Narrow cobblestone streets twisted between old villas clinging to cliffs, and the sea whispered secrets below. But Alara wasn't here for the view. She was here because he asked her. Or rather, he let her come. Damien had been her supervisor during her residency in Milan, a brilliant surgeon with cold hands and a voice like velvet. He never flirted, never encouraged anything, but he had once said to her, during a late shift, "You have a calming presence, like morphine." That sentence had lived rent-free in her chest ever since. Now, in San Lorenzo, she was assigned to the local hospital where Damien was the head of surgery. It was smaller, quieter, and filled with the elderly and dying. Alara moved through the halls like a ghost, always near Damien but never truly beside him. She adjusted his charts, filled his coffee cup, took late-night shifts just to catch a glimpse of him leaving his office. And still, he rarely looked her in the eyes. Her rental flat was barely furnished, but she didn't mind. Each evening, she wrote in her journal, mostly about Damien. His moods, his expressions, the way he smiled at patients, but never at her. She tried not to overthink it. Love, she believed, was about patience. People in the hospital whispered. Some called him brilliant, others called him cold. But the cleaner, an older woman with a limp, once pulled Alara aside near the staff lockers. "You're kind, too kind. That man, he consumes kindness like wine. And when he's done drinking it, he spits out the glass." Alara smiled politely and dismissed the warning. People didn't understand Damien the way she did. He was closed off because he had been hurt, because he needed healing, and she was a healer. There were moments that fed her hope. A hand on her shoulder when she looked tired. A soft murmur of thank you after a long surgery. Once, during a storm, she had brought him a cup of tea, and he had looked at her for a full 10 seconds before saying, "You should be more careful walking alone at night." Was it concern? She thought so, and so she stayed. Even as her hands trembled when he passed too close. Even as her chest ached when he barely spoke a word during shared shifts. At night, she dreamed of more, of dinners, of laughter, of being held. But the days offered no such things. Only silence, only distance. Then, one morning, she found a note on her locker. "Meet me at the Cliff Villa after your shift. We need to talk." Her heart nearly exploded. She fixed her hair, changed her blouse, and walked in the rain to the villa overlooking the sea. The gates were open. Inside, the air smelled like old roses and damp stone. She waited in the living room, sitting straight, hands on her lap. Damien entered, looking tired. He didn't sit. "I need help," he said simply. "There's a patient. She requires discretion. I trust you." "Not I like you. Not you matter. Just I trust you." Still, Alara nodded eagerly. That night marked the beginning of something she couldn't explain. Something sacred, something poisonous. She didn't see that love was not being built. It was being twisted. And she was already bleeding inside, but too in love to feel the sting. And when she left the villa, her reflection on the rain-streaked window no longer looked like a nurse or a woman. It looked like someone who had already begun to disappear. And Damien had barely even touched her yet. Shall I continue with Chapter 2, The Secret Patient, in the same tone and structure? The next morning, Alara arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. Damien had left no instructions, no written order, but his voice from the night before echoed in her mind. "There's a patient. She requires discretion. I trust you." She made her way past the main wards and down a corridor she had never entered. The hallway lights flickered, casting soft shadows on the beige tiles. At the end of the hallway was a heavy wooden door, slightly ajar. She hesitated only a second before slipping in. Inside, the room was dim, the curtains drawn. Medical equipment hummed softly, and there, on a narrow bed surrounded by old monitors, lay a woman, pale, unmoving, comatose. Her arms were bruised, though faintly, as if the injuries were fading but never healing. A feeding tube ran into her nose. Her long, dark hair was matted to her cheek. There was no chart, no name on the door. Nothing to indicate this woman officially existed. Alara sat at her side and quietly checked her vitals. Everything stable, breathing light but steady. She examined the bruises more closely, her heart slowing as her mind raced. The woman didn't look like a patient who had fallen. These marks were deliberate, controlled. She wanted to ask Damien, but he didn't show up all morning. Instead, a single sticky note was left on her desk. Same room, only you, no questions. Alara told herself that he was protecting someone. That maybe this was family. Maybe the woman had suffered something horrible, and Damien was sheltering her from the law or the press. He was a complicated man, a noble man, even if the world didn't understand him. That night, Alara returned to the secret room. She couldn't help herself. She brought a small lavender candle, lit it by the bed, and read softly from a book. She didn't know if the woman could hear, but it made her feel human, kind. Just as she prepared to leave, she heard it, a faint sound, a whisper. "No more, please." Alara froze. The woman hadn't moved, her eyes were still shut, but the voice, raspy, distant, was real. Alara leaned in, her breath catching. The woman's lips were slightly parted. "He hurt." The words drifted like smoke, almost weightless. Alara stepped back in shock, her hands trembled. She ran to Damien's office, heart pounding, but the door was locked. Lights off. She waited outside for hours, but he never came. The next morning, Damien acted like nothing had happened. In the staff room, he handed her a cup of coffee like he always did. Calm, cold, composed. Alara wanted to ask about the woman, wanted to scream, "Who is she? What did you do to her?" But instead, she sipped the coffee and forced a smile. Because the moment she questioned him, she knew she might lose him, and she wasn't ready to lose him, not yet. Later that day, she dared to open one of the locked drawers in the secret room. Inside was a single photo, two people smiling on a balcony by the sea. Damien and the woman, his arm was around her, his lips on her cheek. The inscription on the back, "To my forever, Livia and Damien, 2019. Alara sank to the floor, photo pressed to her chest. So this was the woman, the one before her, the one he loved, or maybe the one he destroyed. And now Alara was here, in her place, in her shadow. The candle burned lower that night, but Alara stayed longer than usual, watching the woman, listening to her shallow breaths. She whispered, "I won't let him hurt you again, I swear." But deep inside, another voice whispered back, "He already is." Shall I continue with Chapter 3, The Kiss That Burned Too Long, in the same style? The storm rolled in suddenly that evening, painting the sky over San Lorenzo del Mare with streaks of silver and violent gray. Alara was just finishing her rounds when Damien appeared in the hallway, his coat already damp from the rain, his eyes unreadable. He said nothing, simply nodded toward the back exit of the hospital. She followed him without asking why. They walked in silence down the stone path behind the hospital, rain soaking into her cardigan, her shoes slipping on the moss. Lightning cracked above the sea, thunder crashing a second later. She should have turned back. She should have spoken. But she kept walking beside him, soaked to the skin, heart pounding. Under the awning near the ambulance garage, Damien finally stopped. He looked at her, eyes flicking from her trembling fingers to the soaked strands of hair framing her face. And then, without warning, he kissed her. It wasn't soft. His hand cupped the back of her neck, firm and demanding. The kiss was all teeth and tension, like he had waited too long and no longer knew how to be gentle. Alara's knees nearly gave out. She had imagined this moment for months, but in her daydreams it was tender. Here, it was control disguised as passion. When he pulled away, his breath was warm against her cheek. "You came when I needed you," he whispered. "No one else would." And that was all it took. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of hidden touches, glances that lingered too long, and stolen hours behind locked doors. He'd call her into his office under the pretense of discussing a patient. Sometimes he would simply pull her close, not say a word, and leave her dizzy with the scent of him on her skin. She didn't ask questions. She didn't speak about Livia, the woman in the hidden ward. She told herself that maybe he was grieving, maybe he needed healing, and maybe, just maybe, she was part of that healing. But then came the bruises. Not the kind left by fists, but by fingers, gripping too tightly during moments that weren't supposed to hurt. Love bites that turned purple, wrists sore from being held down, a faint red mark on her neck that she covered with a turtleneck even in summer. One night, as she stood in front of the mirror in her bathroom, she traced the bruise on her collarbone with shaking fingers. It throbbed under her touch. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, like a woman haunted by someone she couldn't let go. "It's not abuse," she whispered to herself. "It's love with sharp edges." Damien never apologized. He would only look at her with those dark, sharp eyes and say things like, "I need you to be strong for me. You're the only one I trust. Don't ruin this with doubt." And Alara clung to those words like they were gifts. At the hospital, she still cared for Livia each day. The woman hadn't spoken again. Her face remained still, but her presence was louder than ever. Every time Alara touched her arm to check her pulse, she felt the weight of secrets no one else acknowledged. Then one morning, Damien didn't meet Alara's gaze in the hallway. He walked past her without a word, speaking softly to a young new nurse with a laugh she had never heard from him. Something hollow opened in Alara's chest. By that night, Damien returned to her flat unannounced. He kissed her hard, like he was claiming something. When she tried to speak, he silenced her with another kiss, more forceful than before. After he left, she found herself sitting on the cold floor, fingers brushing a bruise on her ribs. The storm outside had passed, but inside her, it had only just begun. Shall I continue with Chapter 4, A Room That Shouldn't Exist? The rain had returned to San Lorenzo del Mare, gentle and constant, like a secret whispered endlessly against windows and rooftops. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Damien invited Alara to his villa for the first time since their affair began. He didn't explain why. He simply sent a message that read, "Come." Doors unlocked. She arrived with her heart in her throat. The villa sat on the edge of a cliff, carved into stone and shaded by ancient olive trees. It was the kind of place built for silence, for secrecy. As she stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of cedarwood and something older, like dust and dried flowers. The rooms were sparsely furnished, yet strangely lived in. Alara noticed books without covers, empty frames on the walls, a mirror cracked clean through the center. Damien wasn't there. She called out, softly at first, then louder. No answer. A strange tug in her gut led her down the hallway, past the guest room, past the kitchen, past the library filled with worn encyclopedias and anatomy texts. Then she saw it, a thin line in the wood paneling, a door, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. It opened without resistance. Inside was a room without windows. Fluorescent lights flickered above a single desk and several shelves. Medical photos, real ones, graphic ones, lined the walls. Not just surgeries, but bruised bodies, stitches, lips swollen from trauma. Some marked with dates, others circled in red. On the shelves were glass jars, each labeled. Some contained strands of hair, others held tiny earrings, buttons, even small bloodied ribbons. But what made her knees lock was the notebook on the desk. She opened it. Her name was everywhere, Alara, over and over. Sometimes written neatly, sometimes scratched violently. Sometimes paired with words like mine, obedient, or too curious. She flipped further. There were sketches of her face. One page was just a dark pencil smear with the phrase, "She listens, she submits, but she looks too much." She backed away, bile rising in her throat. When Damien finally appeared in the doorway, she nearly dropped the journal. His expression didn't change. No guilt, no panic, just tired indifference. "I told you not to go into rooms that aren't for you," he said, voice low. Her voice cracked. "What is this, Damien? Who are you really? Why is my name in that book? Why do you have these things?" He stepped toward her slowly, like approaching an injured animal. "Alara," he said softly, "you're overreacting. I study people. It's part of my process. I document everything, symptoms, behaviors. You're a subject, a partner, a muse. Don't make it more than it is." She flinched when he reached out. "But my hair," she whispered. "You cut my hair last week while I was sleeping." He tilted his head. "You didn't mind. You liked how I touched you that night, didn't you?" Her breath caught. Her hands balled into fists. "That's not the same." He sighed, took the journal from her hand, and placed it back on the desk. Then he cupped her cheek, gently, with practiced tenderness. "You're letting fear poison what we have. That's your weakness, not mine." When she tried to step back, he kissed her. Not forcefully this time, but softly, as if wiping her mind clean. She stood frozen, body responding to the lips she once craved, mind screaming from what she'd seen. When he pulled away, he smiled just enough to make her doubt herself. "Let's not ruin everything over one little room," he whispered. "You and I, we're not like other people. You understand me. That's why I let you see it. No one else could have handled it." She didn't answer. He led her out, closed the hidden door behind them. And as they sat on the sofa sipping tea later, her heart pounded against her chest. Not from love anymore, but from something far more dangerous. Awareness. Something was deeply wrong, but she was already in too deep. And the worst part? A small voice inside her still wanted to be chosen, even if it meant losing herself completely. Shall I continue with Chapter 5, The Night She Bled for Him, in this same narrative tone? It started with a simple text. "Meet me at the hospital, rooftop, midnight, come alone." Dia Lara didn't hesitate. She left her apartment in the rain, the town empty and quiet, the wind pressing against her coat like unseen hands trying to push her back. The hospital loomed in the dark like a cathedral of secrets. She used her staff keycard and took the stairs all the way up, each step echoing with doubt she couldn't silence. When she opened the rooftop door, Damien was already there. He stood near the edge, his coat flapping slightly in the wind, face turned toward the Black Sea. "Alara," he said without turning, "if I died right now, would you cry for me?" The question made her shiver. "Don't say things like that." He finally faced her. His eyes were blank. "People lie when you ask if they love you, but they don't lie when they bleed for you." Before she could answer, he took a step back toward the edge and stumbled. Or at least, it looked like a stumble. She lunged for him, grabbing his arm, pulling him back with all her strength. The slick concrete betrayed her balance. Her wrist slammed hard against the steel railing as she fell forward, dragging both of them down onto the roof. Pain burst through her arm. She gasped. Blood spilled onto her blouse. Her skin was split, deep and raw, but Damien didn't even flinch. He looked down at her bleeding wrist, then into her eyes. "You'd bleed for me," he whispered. She tried to sit up, but he gripped her arm gently, pressing a handkerchief against the wound with calm precision. Not panic, not guilt, almost satisfaction. They went back into the hospital quietly. He wrapped her wrist himself in the on-call room. Not once did he ask if she was okay. Later, when the head nurse saw the blood-stained uniform, Alara forced a smile. Slipped in the stairwell. Clumsy, really. She filed no report, said nothing of the rooftop, nothing of Damien. That night, she lay in bed, her wrist pulsing with pain. She unwrapped the bandage. The cut was long, angry. She could see it leaving a scar. Her fingers brushed it as tears gathered in her eyes. She had bled for him, and he had smiled. The next day at the hospital, she moved through her shifts like a ghost. Damien was warm again, kind, too kind. He brought her tea, touched her lower back as he passed, called her Cara Mia when no one was listening. But something inside Alara had shifted. She still kissed him when he leaned in, still obeyed his whispered requests, still treated the secret patient in the hidden ward. But her eyes had started searching. She watched the nurses more closely, wondered who would believe her if she ever told the truth. She watched Isolde's number flicker on her phone screen and didn't answer, but she kept the call log. She watched Livia's face in that quiet bed, unmoving, unblinking, and thought, how long did she wait for someone to see her too? At night, Alara stared at the scar forming on her wrist. It would never fade. And somewhere deep in her chest, a voice much quieter than Damien's began to speak. Love should never make you bleed. But another voice, louder, crueler, whispered back, if it doesn't hurt, it's not real. Shall I continue with chapter 6? Isolde returns in the same tone and structure. The last time Alara saw her sister, they had shouted at each other across a hospital parking lot in Milan, anger sharp and unforgiving. Isolde had always been the bold one, the one who protected Alara growing up, even when their parents were too busy to notice the quiet bruises sadness left behind. But after years of silence, Alara never thought she'd see her again. Then, one gray morning, she turned a corner near the hospital cafe, and there she was. Isolde stood with a coffee in one hand and a suitcase at her feet. Her hair shorter now, her eyes still the same, focused, unforgiving, warm beneath the steel. Alara, she said simply. Alara froze. For a moment, her body forgot how to breathe. They stared at each other for a beat too long before Alara stepped forward. What are you doing here? Isolde raised an eyebrow. You stopped answering my calls, so I figured I'd come find out what kind of hole you crawled into. They went to a small cafe off the main square. Alara barely touched her tea. Isolde never took her eyes off her. I heard things, she finally said. About this town, about the hospital, about a doctor. Alara flinched. You don't understand. I understand more than you think, Isolde replied coldly. You're thinner, you're pale, you're covering your neck with a scarf even though it's warm out. And you can't even hold that teacup without your hand shaking. Alara looked down, forcing a smile. I'm just tired. The work here is intense. You're in love with him, aren't you? The words landed like a slap. Alara didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night, Isolde checked into a local inn without telling her sister, and by the next morning, she had already begun asking questions. She spoke to the staff, the janitor, a former nurse who had quit suddenly. And she found what Alara had tried to bury beneath excuses and affection, Damien's past. He had once worked in Florence, before that in Naples. In both cities, he'd left suddenly without public explanation. But rumors followed. Rumors of women, interns, patients, colleagues, 3 names, 3 women. All of them vanished within months of knowing him. One was declared dead. Suicide, they said. Another simply moved away, her family refusing to speak to press. The last one, no trace. No obituary, no closure. Isolde printed the articles, printed the legal documents. She waited for Alara outside the hospital gates. You need to see this, she said, holding out the folder. Alara didn't take it. Stop, Isolde, please. You're in danger. No, Alara whispered. He's not like that with me. Of course he isn't. Yet. Tears blurred Alara's vision. He needs someone. He trusts me. I can help him. Isolde's voice cracked, but she stayed firm. You can't save a man who's still sharpening the knives. Alara turned away. She didn't speak to her sister for 2 days. She buried herself in work, avoided the mirror, avoided Livia, avoided thinking. But one night she entered the hidden ward to check Livia's pulse and found her eyes open just for a moment. And in that moment, Livia blinked slowly, as if saying, run. Later that night, Alara met Isolde outside the villa. Rain fell again. Always rain in this town. I'm sorry, Alara whispered. You shouldn't have come. But when she looked up, her sister was crying too. You're all I have, Isolde said. Alara hesitated and hugged her, and for the first time in weeks, something inside her cracked open. It wasn't strength. It was the beginning of awakening. An awakening she knew would come with pain. Shall I continue with Chapter 7, The Poisoned Letter, in the same style and tone? The envelope was waiting on her doorstep when Alara returned home after a long, quiet shift. No stamp, no handwriting, just her name, printed in red across the front. She thought it was paint, until she opened it. Inside was a single torn piece of paper, brittle and stiff. The smell hit her first, faint copper, sour and dry. Then her eyes locked on the words, "You are next, unless you bury him first." No signature, no explanation, just those words, written in dried blood. Her fingers trembled as she folded the paper back into the envelope, slid it into the back of her drawer, and slammed it shut. Her heart pounded in her ears, louder than the wind outside. She paced for almost an hour, telling herself it was a prank, a cruel joke, someone trying to scare her. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, sleep didn't come. Her eyes stayed open until morning, staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps, for doors creaking, for whispers from the walls. The next day at the hospital, she rushed to the hidden ward. Livia's bed was empty. The machines were gone. The sheets were stripped. The lavender candle she had placed by the bedside was gone too. Panic flooded her chest. She checked the hospital records. No transfer forms, no discharge notes, no mention of the patient ever existing. She cornered Damien in the hallway, barely holding her voice steady. "Where is she?" He blinked, unfazed. "Who? Livia?" He smiled faintly. "You must be overworked, Alara. I don't know who that is." She stared at him, stunned. His eyes were calm, collected. He was lying, boldly, effortlessly. "You asked me to care for her," she said, her voice cracking. "You gave me access. You. I think you need rest," he interrupted. "You've been fragile lately." She stepped back, heart pounding. The walls seemed to close in. That night, Alara returned to the villa. He wasn't home, or at least, he didn't answer the door. Something inside her snapped. She used the hidden key she once saw him tuck behind the garden lantern and let herself in. The house smelled like smoke and damp earth. She moved quickly, past the living room, past the old piano, into the bedroom. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she found it beneath the bed. A velvet box, small and familiar. Inside, an engagement ring. Platinum, simple, elegant. And engraved inside the band were the words, "Forever, Livia." Alara dropped the box. The floor seemed to fall beneath her. He had lied, over and over, and not just to protect her from the past. He had rewritten it completely, erased a woman, erased her voice, and now he was doing it again. The letter came back to her. "You are next." Her reflection in the darkened mirror looked pale, her eyes hollow, not with fear, with something else, the beginning of a choice, because love had been blind, but now it was beginning to see. Shall I continue with Chapter 8, Sacrifice in the Basement, in the same tone and structure? Isolde didn't show up for their planned lunch. At first, Alara told herself it was nothing, just a delay, or maybe her sister was giving her space again. But when the innkeeper claimed she never returned to her room the night before, a cold weight dropped into Alara's stomach. She searched every street of San Lorenzo, every corner cafe, even the cliff paths they used to walk as children. No answer from her phone, no messages, no goodbye. That night, Alara returned to Damien's villa. She didn't knock. She pushed the door open and stepped into silence. The house was too still. The scent had changed, no longer cedarwood, but something sharper, metallic, ancient, a whisper of blood. She moved through the hallway, past the hidden room, past the cracked mirror, until she noticed it, beneath the rug in the study. A metal handle embedded into the floorboards. She pulled. A stairwell revealed itself, steep and narrow, descending into darkness. Each step groaned beneath her weight. The air grew colder, damp. The scent of iron thickened until it clawed at her throat. At the bottom, a single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting yellow light over the stone walls. And then she saw her. Isolde chained to a wooden chair, eyes wide, mouth gagged. Her face was bruised, her hair soaked with sweat, but she was alive. Alara! The word barely escaped through the gag, eyes screaming. And just behind her, Damien stood in a black shirt, sleeves rolled up, gloves on. In front of him, a stone table, a basin, a set of surgical tools that didn't belong in any hospital. "You weren't supposed to find this yet," he said, calm as ever. Alara rushed forward, but he raised a hand. "Don't. Let her go," Alara breathed. "She's done nothing." Damien tilted his head. "She's the infection. She's pulling you away. She doubts us." "She's my sister. She's the reason you're doubting me," he said sharply. "And doubt destroys everything. But love can still be saved." He stepped toward the altar and touched the blade lying on it gently, like it was sacred. One sacrifice, one clean offering, and everything can begin again. You and me. Alara's breath shook. Her eyes went to Isolde, who shook her head violently, begging through her eyes. Then slowly, Alara stepped toward the table. "I'll do it," she whispered. "Take me, let her go." Damien's eyes flickered. "No, I won't lose you." "You won't," she said. "But if you hurt her, I'll never be yours. I'll never stay." He hesitated. She reached into her coat pocket, hand closing around something cold and small. The vial. The one she had stolen from the hospital lab days ago. A powerful, tasteless poison used in rare surgical emergencies, meant to paralyze before sedation. She uncorked it behind her back as she walked to the altar. "Let her go," she whispered again, "and I'll give you all of me." Damien smiled softly. "That's all I ever wanted." She lifted the vial to her lips and drank it in one swallow. The taste was nothing, but the burn in her throat spread instantly. She collapsed before he could reach her, her eyes locked with Isolde's. Damien screamed her name, "Alara," but it was distant, muffled. Her limbs numbed, heart slowing. As her vision dimmed, she saw him panic for the first time, and she knew. She had broken him, not with rage, but with sacrifice. She had chosen love, but not his version of it. She had chosen to give her life, not to him, but to save someone else from becoming her. And as the cold swallowed her, she felt no fear, only silence, only freedom. Shall I continue with Chapter 9, Blood on His Hands, in the same tone and progression? Alara's world was darkness, thick, heavy, endless. Sounds came first, far away and broken. Metal clinking, footsteps rushing, someone screaming her name. Then pain. Dull at first, then spreading like fire through her chest and limbs. Her breath returned in jagged pieces, each one dragging her back into the world. She woke up in a hospital bed, eyes fluttering under the harsh white light. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside her. She blinked twice before realizing the voice beside her was real. "Alara, you're alive." It was Isolde. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but her voice carried something firm. Relief and fire. "You saved me," she whispered, holding Alara's hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. "I got out. I got them. It's over now." Fragments came back slowly. Damien's voice, the taste of poison, the cold of the basement, the chains around Isolde's wrists. Alara tried to sit up, but her body refused. "Don't move," Isolde said quickly. "You were gone for almost 6 minutes. They had to restart your heart." Alara's lips cracked open. "Where is he?" Isolde hesitated, then exhaled. "After you collapsed, he went wild. He didn't try to run. He locked himself in the basement with you. When the police came, he stood over you with that blade, the same one he meant to use for me." She looked away for a moment, then met Alara's gaze again. "He stabbed himself. Deep. But not before saying the most twisted thing I've ever heard." Alara's heart clenched. He said, "Even death can't unlove you," like he thought dying would preserve something beautiful. Later, Alara learned the details in pieces. The blade he used had still been coated with the remnants of the poison. It worked slowly, paralyzing, then stopping the heart. The police found him collapsed on the basement floor, blood pooling beneath his body, his hand still gripping the handle, the stains soaked into the stone. Permanent. They carried Alara out just minutes later. The paramedics worked in silence, Isolde riding beside her in the ambulance, clutching her wrist with trembling fingers. Damien was declared dead at 3:11 a.m. The next morning, San Lorenzo woke to whispers and sirens. The hospital director resigned. The secret ward was sealed. Investigators uncovered years of falsified files, hidden prescriptions, and missing patients whose records had been buried or erased. 3 families were contacted. 2 returned. 1 refused. Alara didn't speak to the press. She didn't want to be a story. She wanted peace, a quiet ending. But peace came slowly. Back in her apartment, she cleaned out the drawer where she had hidden the bloody letter, burned it, watched the words curl and vanish. She stared at her wrist one evening where the scar had begun to fade. It would always be there. A thin reminder, but it no longer burned. Assault stayed longer than planned. She slept on Alara's couch, made strong coffee, replaced the mirrors Alara had covered. One evening, as they stood by the window watching the sea, Isolde broke the silence. He thought you belonged to him. Alara nodded, her voice low. So did I, until I learned love doesn't chain you, it frees you. They stood in silence again, the waves crashing below. Damien's blood had stained the villa floor, but it no longer stained her memory. He was gone, and she had survived. Not because she loved him, but because she had finally chosen to love herself more. Shall I complete the final chapter 10, The Sea Doesn't Forget, in the same style and tone? The seasons changed in San Lorenzo del Mare, but the silence of the town never quite lifted. The hospital, once alive with footsteps and murmured prayers, now stood hollow, its windows shuttered and doors chained with rusted locks. No one spoke of the scandal anymore. No one dared. People simply looked away when they passed by the old gates, as if something still breathed inside. Alara remained. She could have left. There were offers to relocate, apologies from distant authorities, a counselor who said healing begins with distance. But distance, she realized, didn't erase memory. And so she stayed, because some wounds were not meant to be run from. Some had to be carried until they grew quiet on their own. The cliffside where it all began had become her place of stillness. She stood there often, just at the edge, coat wrapped tight around her, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Below, the sea thrashed like a living thing. Violent, honest. It never pretended to be calm. Isolde had gone back to Milan. She had tried to stay, but the weight of what had happened in San Lorenzo clung to her too tightly. They hugged for a long time at the train station. Neither said goodbye, because they both knew some things didn't end, they just paused. Alara now lived alone in a small stone house near the edge of town. No more white coats, no more blood under her nails. She planted a garden. She read in the mornings. Sometimes she woke up gasping, dreams filled with footsteps behind her or chains clinking in the dark. But the days in between grew longer, more quiet, more kind. Her body had healed. Scars faded, color returned to her cheeks. She could walk without pain, breathe without panic. But her soul remained marked. Some nights when the wind howled just right, she'd hear it. A whisper carried from the sea. Love me again. It wasn't real. She knew that, but it felt real. She would close the window and sit beside the fireplace, clutching a blanket that Isolde had left behind, and whisper back, never. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. The poison may have drained from her blood, but it had touched something deeper, something love had cracked open and madness had tried to claim. Damien was dead. She had seen his body, buried the memories. But memory is not something you bury in the ground. It lives in smells, in flickers of light, in the taste of lavender tea, in the cold of metal against skin. It lives in her. And though she had survived, she knew the sea below would always remember what happened above it. And sometimes, late at night, when she looked into the darkness from her bedroom window, she wasn't sure if the whisper calling her from the cliffs was his or her own.